Welcome back to the Halloween Tea Party, guys, where I'm attempting to do 31 tutorials for the 31 days of October. Today's look is one of my favourite kinds of looks. It's a cel-shaded zombie. I'm starting out with a grey eyebrow pencil to map out some of the design on my face. And I'm not mapping out everything, I'm just mapping out areas that I really don't want to get the grey on, so things like the teeth, the eyes, and some of the bigger areas of highlighting. You don't have to use an eyebrow pencil for this. You can use, a lip liner, an eyeliner, an eyeshadow, whatever you have to hand. But it's best to use something that is the same color as the mid-tone of your look. So the mid-tone of this look is gray, which is why I'm using a gray liner. Once I'm happy with all of the mapping out, I'm going in with a gray water-activated face paint and a small brush and just going around all of that mapping out on the outside of the lines where the gray would be touching. This is just so I can have really nice crisp lines against all the edges, because part of cel shading is those gorgeously crisp lines. Then I'm switching over to a flat packing eyeshadow brush to fill in the smaller, large areas. So areas like around the teeth where it's going to be hard to get in there with a big brush, but it's going to take too long with a detail brush. For some unknown reason, I decided to fill in larger areas with this eyeshadow brush as well, which you shouldn't do, guys. It can be really hard to get an even, non-streaky coverage in a large area with a small brush, and aside from anything, it just takes a really long time. What you should do is make sure that you're bringing the paint from the smaller areas out far enough. So for example, on the forehead, when I switch up to a large brush, I just want to have to do a couple of swipes to fill in the forehead. I don't want to have to try and get around the eyes or down the nose or anything. So kind of aim for that situation. When I get to the neck, I realize, there's no way I'm painting my entire neck with this tiny brush, and switch up to a larger brush. Even though I haven't completely mapped out where the black's going to go, I'm keeping in mind where I think it's going to be so that I can leave those areas kind of clear. Then I'm taking a white water-activated body paint to do the eyes and some highlighting. I'm using a very thin paintbrush to outline the white area of the eyes so that we get that really nice crisp line. And then switching over to a clean, flat packing eyeshadow brush to fill it in. White paint is notoriously difficult to get even coverage with, so you definitely don't want to try and fill it in with that tiny detail brush. Once it's painted, I'm keeping that eye closed so that the paint doesn't start creasing up. And once it's dry, I'm going in with a white eyeshadow and a fluffy brush and just packing eyeshadow on top of the paint. And it works better to pat the eyeshadow on rather than swiping it. When you pat it, it kind of sticks to the face paint and stays where it is. When you swipe, there's a chance that you're going to move the face paint around, especially if there's any areas that aren't completely dry. This is going to help with any creasing or rubbing, because face paint on your eyelids does tend to crease really, really badly. If you get any fallout from the powder, like I have, then you can go back in with your grey paint and a small brush and just go over that area. It's easier to clean it up with paint than to try and brush it off, because it kind of sticks to the face paint and brushing it off just doesn't really do anything. For the highlights, I'm using the same white. This is a 3-shade look, so black, white, and grey. And in general with cel shading, you don't have blended out highlights and shadows. They have harsh edges. But if you want to go for a more blended out look, you should definitely do the highlights before the shadows, because it's harder to blend white around black than it is to blend black around white. If you want the highlights to be stark white, then you should go in with a cotton bud first with some warm water or makeup remover and get the grey off anywhere where there's going to be white, or you could use a wax-based white instead of a glycerin-based white. Wax-based water-activated paints are much better at layering on top of other colours without getting contaminated than glycerin-based colours. For the highlights on my forehead, I'm raising my eyebrows so that I can use the natural lines across my forehead as a guide for where those highlights need to go. And plus, doing this means that if you do raise your eyebrows while you're wearing this, then the highlights are going to be in the right place for it to make sense. For the other highlights, I'm using my knowledge of light and shadow. If you don't understand much about light and shadow, then you can use a lamp and shine it at your face from a certain angle, and then you'll be able to see where the shadows and highlights fall. But basically you're imagining that there is a light source hitting you and then filling in the highlights and shadows based on how they would fall from that light source. For the shadows, I'm using a black water activated body paint. And I'm starting out with my forehead wrinkles, so I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm raising my eyebrows so I can see where the shadows are going to fall and adding them in those spots, in my crinkles. On the side that my imaginary light is falling, I'm making the shadows much thinner in those forehead wrinkles than on the side that's more in shadow. I'm using a really thin paintbrush to do this so I can get nice crisp thin lines where I need them. And I'm also using that to outline bigger areas of shadow. So it's really similar to what we did with the grey. I'm outlining using this paintbrush, then for smaller large areas I'm going in with a flat brush, and then for the really big areas I'm going in with a huge brush to fill them in. Then I'm switching back over to the white to fill in the teeth, because the teeth will be outlined with black and I don't want to try and put white paint inside of black paint. When you're putting paint on your lips, it's one of the areas that's going to deteriorate the fastest, especially if you're eating or drinking or anything like that. So usually for looks like this, it's better to use something like a liquid to matte lipstick that's going to dry and set on your lips and is designed to be in that area and not come off, instead of a paint. So if you have a white lipstick, then you might want to do the teeth using that. Anyway, I'm using a brush that's kind of tooth shaped so that I can just paint the teeth on with single swipes instead of having to outline them with the detail brush and then try and fill them in. But if you don't have a suitable brush for this, then you could go that way instead. I'm not bringing the teeth all the way down to my lip parting. I'm leaving a small gap between the row of teeth because I find it makes it look more natural if you have that black line between them. Especially if you have tooth enamel and you can paint your teeth black as well, because then when you talk, it looks like these teeth are your actual teeth. Now that the teeth are in, that's all of these solid areas of white in. So I'm going back to the shadows and I don't have to worry about leaving areas to fill in with white. It is kind of hard to explain like exactly what is going on aside from, I'm painting on the shadows and then I'm painting on the highlights. But basically you're using the shadows and the highlighting to give your face structure and shape, the same as you would with contouring and highlighting in normal makeup. So if you did a zombie look, you would contour very heavily around the eyes to give them a sunken in look. So we're doing the same thing here, it's just we're not blending it out and it's much, much harsher. It's also not as blocky as contouring, because in contouring you would kind of contour your entire cheek area and boom, you have a sunken in cheek. Whereas with this, we're trying to use it to show kind of where skin is hanging and wrinkling. So if we fill the whole cheek area in with black on the side that's lighted, it's just going to look like a big block. It's not going to give you a really cool effect. Because this is a zombie, obviously they don't have perfect skin. They have lots of rot and scratches and cuts and all that kind of stuff. So I'm using the black to add all of that in as well. And on the teeth too, because we don't want the teeth to look too perfect. They should be a bit, cracked and gnarly and dirty and stuff. I'm bringing this down my neck as well, because if you don't paint your neck and it's sticking out of your costume, it's gonna ruin the effect, in my opinion. I am also painting on the shirt, but if I was wearing this out for Halloween, then I would get a grey shirt and some black fabric paint, and I would paint the shirt to match the look, so I'd cell shade the shirt as well. But, that's up to you. You could just get an old shirt and rip holes in it and make it look a bit dirty, like whatever you want. And I'm painting my ears as well, because otherwise they are going to stick out like a sore thumb. Once I'm happy with all of the shadow placement, I'm going back in with the white and a thin paintbrush to add in the highlights. Because the shadows are so intense in this look, I don't want to do the same with the highlights, because if there's huge blocks of white and huge blocks of black, it's going to make it look more like black and white with a tiny bit of grey. It's going to overwhelm the whole look. The general idea with shadows and highlights is where there's a shadow, there should be a highlight. But, you know, this is not hyper-realism. We have some artistic freedom over where these highlights are going. But it is a good rule to use as a base. So we have the wrinkles on the forehead, the shadows for them. So obviously, in between each shadow, there's going to be a highlight because that area is raised. For areas where the skin's been ripped off, like around the teeth, the black there it's not a shadow on the same piece of skin, it's a shadow on skin that's underneath the ripped off skin. So I'm highlighting right along the black and using very thin lines so that it looks like there's light hitting the edge of that piece of skin where it's ripped. For highlights that are on the same piece of skin as the shadow, I'm making them not as intense and not as thin. And I'm not sticking them right up against the black because you would normally have, you know, the shadow and then the midtone and then the highlight. There would be a space between the highlight and the shadow. And of course, I'm carrying these highlights on down the neck and onto the ears so that everything looks really nice and cohesive. And that's it, guys. You are now a cel shaded zombie. There should be another video going live tomorrow. So if you want to be notified when that's up, you can subscribe to my channel. If you like this look, you can let me know by hitting the like button. And if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, let me know in the comments section below and I will do my best to reply to you. If you decide to recreate this look, I would love to see how it turns out. You can post it on social media, tag me in the picture and use the hashtag Halloween Tea Party and then I'll be able to see it. And I'm also having a little competition over on my Instagram where you could win some goodies. All of the details are over on my Instagram and I will leave them in the description box below. If this look isn't quite what you're going for, then here are some alternative looks that might be more your style. I hope you have an amazing Halloween and I will see you tomorrow.